My name is Jenna. I'm 29 years old, and I'm sitting at my older brother's wedding in a Manhattan ballroom, packed with more than 500 guests who believe they're watching a perfect family celebrate a perfect love story. My mother hasn't left the groom's side all night, straightening his jacket, smoothing imaginary creases, while my father works the room like a politician, shaking hands, laughing loudly, reminding everyone how proud he is. This wedding is exactly what they wanted: grand, flawless, public proof that everything in this family is under control. Then my father raises his glass and the room slowly quiets. He talks about legacy, about tradition, about how proud he is of the man standing beside him, about how this wedding represents doing life the right way. And when people start applauding, he turns his head toward me and asks casually, comfortably, "When is your turn?" A few people at our table pause, forks hovering, smiles frozen halfway. I don't joke and I don't deflect. I look straight ahead and answer calmly. It already happened. There's a brief hesitation in the air, like the room missed a step. My brother laughs softly, the kind of laugh meant to smooth things over, as if I just made an awkward joke, and my mother cuts in immediately, her tone firm but sweet, reminding me that tonight isn't about me and that this isn't the place. I notice a couple of guests stealing curious glances before looking away. I don't argue, and I don't explain. I don't raise my voice or try to convince anyone. I just add one sentence quietly enough to sound almost reasonable. 6 months ago, you were invited. My father lowers his glass a little too slowly. My mother's smile tightens without disappearing. My brother's laugh stops a beat too late. No one asks a follow-up question, but everyone at that table understands something isn't right, even if they don't know why yet. Before this goes any further, subscribe to hear the rest of this story, because what happened to that invitation didn't just ruin a family moment, it triggered a chain of events that ended this wedding before the night was over, and nothing about what followed stayed private for long. 6 months earlier, life felt simpler than it does now, quieter in a way that made me believe things would eventually make sense if I gave them time. Luke and I didn't plan a big wedding, not because we couldn't, but because neither of us wanted a performance. We wanted a moment that felt honest, something small, where we could look around the room and recognize every face. His family filled the space, easily arriving early, helping with details, offering support in ways that didn't need to be announced. His mother held my hands before the ceremony and told me she was proud of us. His father spoke to Luke with a seriousness that came from love, not expectation. In the front row, I had reserved 3 seats anyway. I knew who they were meant for. I didn't tell anyone not to save them, even though a part of me understood they might stay empty. I convinced myself that my parents were delayed, that my brother would walk in at the last moment, maybe embarrassed but present, because that's how families work when it really matters. I had sent the invitations weeks earlier, chosen carefully, and addressed by hand, not to impress, but because this wasn't something I wanted mishandled. Everything was verified, confirmed, and documented, and when it came to my family's invitation, I even reached out directly to my brother and told him to expect it. He read the message the same day. The read receipt stayed there longer than it should have. Hours passed without a response, and when one finally came, it was brief and vague, just enough to sound responsible without committing to anything I'll tell Mom later. Nothing followed. No questions, no requests for details, no acknowledgement that this was important to me. I remember staring at my phone and deciding in that moment not to push. It felt humiliating to chase my own family for confirmation, as if my life event needed extra validation to be taken seriously. The night before the wedding, Luke asked if I wanted to call them just to be sure there wasn't a misunderstanding. He didn't push. He asked the way someone does when they want to protect you from disappointment rather than create it. I said no. I said if they wanted to be there, they already knew how. I told myself that trusting them was the mature thing to do, that adulthood meant not demanding proof of care where it should already exist. When the ceremony began, I focused on Luke, on his expression when he saw me walk toward him, on the steadiness of his hands as we stood side by side. The seats remained empty. No late arrivals, no excuses whispered in my ear, no last-minute explanations. I felt the absence without reacting to it, telling myself that this moment belonged to the two of us and that everything else could be addressed later. Luke's family applauded when we were married, their warmth wrapping around me in a way that felt earned, not obligated. Afterward, people congratulated us, hugged us, offered advice about marriage that came from experience rather than expectation. Luke's mother told me quietly that I would never have to wonder if I belonged, that I was family now in the simplest sense of the word. I smiled, thanked her, and didn't explain why no one from my side was there, because explaining would have made the absence real. As the night ended and we gathered our things, those empty chairs were still there, untouched, exactly where I'd left them. I told myself there had been a reason they didn't come, a conflict I wasn't aware of, a miscommunication that could be cleared up later. I chose to believe it wasn't intentional because believing otherwise would have meant accepting something about my family that I wasn't ready to face. I stepped into my marriage holding on to that belief, convinced that silence didn't automatically mean rejection and that trust once given deserved the chance to stand. Back in the ballroom, the celebration doesn't pause. Just because something uncomfortable has been said, the music continues, servers move between tables, laughter returns in scattered bursts. But around my family, the atmosphere tightens in a way I recognize immediately. When I state again calmly that I am married and that this wasn't sarcasm or poor timing, my mother responds first, letting out a quick laugh and brushing it off as a joke, using the same tone she's relied on for years whenever she wants to shrink a problem without addressing it. The word does its job, instantly softening the statement and signaling to anyone listening that nothing serious is happening. My brother steps in without missing the cue, smiling lightly, as if amused by my need for attention, suggesting I've chosen a strange moment to say something so dramatic, framing it like a harmless misunderstanding rather than a contradiction. There's no edge in his voice, which gives everyone permission to agree, without guilt. My father follows before I can respond. Not angry, not loud, just controlled and disappointed, explaining that if something like this truly mattered, I would have followed up, that important events don't get left hanging, that responsibility doesn't disappear just because feelings are involved. He says it like a rule, not an argument, and rules don't invite discussion. From there, the story builds effortlessly. No one remembers receiving an invitation. My mother adds that messages get lost all the time, that mail isn't reliable anymore. Her concern carefully calibrated to sound reasonable and protective, while my brother shrugs, mildly irritated, as if he's being accused of incompetence rather than confronted with an inconsistency. Within moments, a complete narrative forms around me, one where nothing intentional happened, nothing cruel occurred, and I simply misinterpreted silence as meaning something more. I watch it take shape, how repeating the same explanation from multiple mouths turns doubt into certainty, and I notice how nearby guests glance over before relaxing once the tension is repackaged into something manageable, something that doesn't require involvement. Weddings aren't places for complications, and my family knows exactly how to use that. I consider interrupting, pushing back while the version is still fresh, but I also recognize the pattern. If I show emotion, I'm unstable. If I insist, I'm disruptive. Every reaction I could offer has already been accounted for. The quieter I stay, the more reasonable they appear, and that realization settles heavier than the remarks themselves. Someone from my extended family leans close, her voice, urgent but gentle, telling me, this isn't the place that saying more will ruin everything, that weddings are fragile and shouldn't be burdened with personal conflicts, that whatever needs to be discussed can happen later without an audience. She frames it as kindness, as concern for everyone involved. But the message beneath it is clear: preserve comfort, absorb the damage quietly. I nod slightly, not because I agree, but because responding would require explaining myself again, and I already know where that leads. When I look back at my family, they've moved on completely. My brother's attention has shifted elsewhere, satisfied that the disruption has been neutralized. My mother's smile eases now that control has been restored. My father resumes talking to guests, reassured that order still holds. Their version is accepted not because it's convincing, but because it's convenient, because it demands nothing from anyone listening. So I stop talking. I don't clarify or defend or ask to be heard, and I let the moment pass, the way they want it to, watching interest fade as eyes slide away. From the outside, it probably looks like restraint, like maturity, like someone realizing she spoke out of turn, but internally, something sharp clicks into place. I understand then that gaslighting doesn't work because it's persuasive. It works because it's supported. And choosing silence in that moment isn't agreement, it's recognition that truth cannot survive in a room that has already decided what it needs. Several weeks earlier, after the wedding noise had faded and distance made patterns harder to ignore, the doubt finally organized itself into something solid. Jenna didn't spiral or accuse or replay conversations in her head. Out of anger, she went back through everything with Luke. The way you review a finished project after realizing a failure couldn't be accidental. They sat at the kitchen table late at night. Laptops opened, the house quiet, and started with what could not lie. The invitations had been ordered on time, addressed carefully, tracked from the moment they left the printer, and when Luke pulled up the delivery confirmations, they were boring in the most important way. Every status clean, every shipment marked complete, nothing missing, nothing delayed. Jenna stared at the screen longer than necessary, not searching for doubt, but watching herself accept that the problem had never been logistics. They opened the courthouse record next, not for comfort, but for grounding, seeing their marriage listed plainly, legally filed, and unquestionable, a reminder that some truths didn't require belief to exist. Luke watched her closely before speaking, choosing his words the way someone does when they know what comes next can't be softened. He told her that the moment she said this out loud, there would be no version of resolution that felt neat, that families like hers didn't break, because of lies they fractured when silence stopped doing its job. He explained that confronting them privately would feel reasonable, but would only give them time to adjust their narrative, time to make her doubts look emotional instead of factual, time to reframe her as unstable before she ever finished a sentence. Jenna didn't argue because it fit too cleanly with every past experience she'd tried to rationalize away. She asked him quietly what they actually needed from her, and Luke answered without hesitation. They needed her compliance, not her clarity. That was the moment something irreversible settled in. Jenna understood that her family did not require the truth to continue functioning. They required her agreement to blur it, and as long as she kept absorbing discomfort instead of naming it, they would remain intact at her expense. She thought briefly about calling her mother, about asking her brother directly what had happened, but each imagined exchange unraveled the same way, concern turning into correction, explanation shifting into critique. Her feelings becoming the real issue while the facts dissolved. She saw then that a private conversation would only protect them, offering a controlled space where denials sounded measured and consequences never surfaced. Luke didn't tell her what decision to make. He simply said that if she chose to speak, she could only do it once, without framing, without defending, without repetition. Because repeating yourself is how people like her family taught others to stop listening. Jenna sat with that longer than she expected, feeling the weight of what it meant to stop asking for space inside a system that thrived on her restraint. The choice wasn't loud or dramatic, it was precise. She would not negotiate reality. She would not seek permission to be believed, and she would not confront anyone in private where the truth could be diluted. Whatever she said would stand exactly as spoken without cleanup or clarification, and whatever followed would not be hers to manage. Luke reached across the table and took her hand, not as reassurance, but as acknowledgement because both of them understood that once she crossed that line, there would be no return to polite distance or forced normalcy. The silence she had maintained for years was about to end, and there would be no second chance to make it comfortable. As the evening settles back into formality and the last clink of glasses fades, the master of ceremonies returns to the microphone with practiced ease and announces that the slideshow is ready, a montage of memories meant to celebrate Ryan and Olivia as the lights begin to dim and the room instinctively turns toward the screens. Just before it starts, my name is mentioned lightly, and without warning, an invitation to say a few words. Nothing official, just something brief before the presentation, and for a moment the timing feels almost mercifully accidental. I rise because hesitation would read louder than refusal, and as I step forward, my attention goes not to my family but straight to Olivia. She looks exactly how someone should look on her wedding night, relaxed in the belief that the most unpredictable moments are already behind her, smiling easily at the people around her, unaware of the tension tightening every instinct in my body. Seeing her that way forces a clarity I can't avoid, that she is not part of what I'm about to break open, that whatever deception brought us here was in motion, long before she entered this family, and the weight of that recognition presses harder than anger ever did. For a few seconds, the choice arranges itself in clean outlines. If I stop now, if I say something harmless and step back, the slideshow will roll as planned. Applause will smooth over whatever discomfort lingered, and the night will conclude exactly as intended. Guests will leave believing the version they were offered, and the damage will remain where it has always lived, contained quiet, absorbed by me. Nothing visible will collapse, and that is precisely why this option feels dangerous. The other path offers no such gentle exit because once I move forward, there is no way to frame what follows as misunderstanding or emotion, no point where things can be stitched back together without tension. I stand there long enough to feel the room waiting, not impatient, just receptive, and I understand that this isn't a choice between protecting or hurting anyone, but between preserving a lie and allowing consequences to exist. I don't explain myself because explanations invite negotiation, and I don't apologize because apologies soften intent. Instead, I turn, slightly retrieve my phone and connect it to the system with a motion so ordinary it barely draws attention, giving the technician a brief nod that he hesitates over, before complying. The shift in the room happens without sound, a subtle tightening as people sense something is off, without yet understanding why. I'm aware again of Olivia, of the innocence that will not shield her from the fallout no matter how deliberate I am, and that awareness makes my restraint sharper rather than weaker. The lights dim fully, the opening image appears, and it is immediately clear this isn't the curated beginning everyone expected. Conversation stalls. Someone laughs uncertainly, and I stay exactly where I am. Posture, steady face composed, watching the audience rather than the screen as confusion ripples outward. I hear Ryan shift behind me, a sharp intake of breath, a whispered question that doesn't reach far enough to become interruption, and the absence of protest is louder than anything else. No one stops it, not because they agree, but because they don't yet understand what's unfolding, and that hesitation seals what comes next. The slideshow advances not dramatically, not with music swelling or commentary attached, just the first piece of information presented without context or emotion, something factual enough to exist on its own, and the room collectively leans in as recognition begins to replace assumption. In that moment, the tension isn't explosive or triumphant, it's suspended, stretched thin between support and discomfort, because the truth hasn't destroyed anything yet, but it has already made it impossible to return to what came before. The screen holds the first image long enough for recognition to settle over the room before anyone dares to react. A delivery record displayed plainly without narration or design. The address correct, the timestamp clean, and Ryan's signature sitting exactly where it should not be. The ballroom shifts into a quiet that feels unnatural, not shocked, but arrested, as guests move their attention from the screen to Ryan and back again, waiting for him to explain what reality has already confirmed. He reacts quickly, a reflex sharpened by years of deflecting discomfort, stepping forward with a strained laugh and lifting his hand slightly as though dismissing a technical glitch, saying he signed for dozens of packages that names blur together, that handling deliveries never meant handling meaning. His voice is confident but slightly rushed, built on the assumption that explanation itself still holds power. The slide advances without anyone touching it, bringing up a chain of verified scans, each one narrowing the margin for coincidence, his name appearing again where chance can no longer survive. Ryan's posture stiffens as he pivots strategies, sensing denial is no longer viable, and he reframes instead, talking about responsibility, about family reputation, about appearances that must be protected, because not every choice fits the image they present to the world. He doesn't say he was right. He says he was careful, positioning himself not as someone who interfered, but as someone who managed a situation others could not handle properly. I let him speak, because justifications weaken when they stretch too long, and, when I respond, my voice stays level and sparse, pointing out that his reasoning contradicts itself, that he cannot claim. The invitation meant nothing, while also insisting it required intervention, that forgetting and deciding cannot exist in the same explanation. The words don't sound sharp, but the effect is immediate because the logic stands without emotion to distract from it. Ryan hesitates mid-sentence, the practiced fluency breaking, and for the first time, the room senses that the narrative he relied on no longer belongs to him. That is when Olivia speaks, not loudly, not theatrically, but clearly enough to redirect every eye in the room. She doesn't glance at me, doesn't acknowledge the screen. She looks straight at Ryan and asks him why a decision that affected her marriage was made without her knowledge, why something framed as protection never included her consent. The question redraws the moment, completely shifting it away from sibling conflict into something far more personal and far more undeniable. Ryan tries to respond the same way he has all evening. Broad concern, careful wording, but Olivia doesn't accept generalities. She asks when he planned to tell her, or if telling her had never been part of the plan at all, and the silence that follows is heavier than accusation, because it leaves no space to hide inside explanation. Around them, the ballroom feels frozen, guests caught between politeness and the understanding that they are witnessing something irreversible. My parents remain still, their earlier certainty drained, because the issue has moved beyond miscommunication into choice and consequence. Ryan looks again at the screen as if hoping for it to change, then back to Olivia, realizing too late that the justification he chose now exposes exactly what he wanted to conceal: control disguised as care. I don't speak again, because there is nothing left to add. The evidence no longer belongs to my voice. It stands independent and complete, forcing engagement rather than belief. In that moment, I understand that the point of no return isn't when truth is revealed, but when the person who shaped the lie is required to defend intent instead of denying action. And as the ballroom remains silent, celebration paused and unrecoverable, everyone present understands that whatever follows will happen after certainty, not confusion, and that no version of this night can ever return to what it was meant to be. After a long, suffocating pause where no one seems willing to move, first, Olivia breaks the standoff with a decision delivered calmly and without ceremony, stating that the wedding will not continue, her voice steady enough that it leaves no room for interpretation or appeal. The effect is immediate and unsettling, not explosive, but deeply disorienting as the ballroom struggles to recalibrate itself around a reality no one prepared for. A low murmur spreads, chairs shift, guests exchange quick looks, that mix curiosity with discomfort. And then the movement begins tentative at first, then unmistakable people standing collecting coats, murmuring apologies to no one in particular as they make their way toward the exits. The elegance of the space collapses into logistics event staff. Fall silent. Vendors pause mid-task, and the evening's momentum drains out of the room as if a valve has been opened somewhere out of sight. Ryan remains near the front, rigid and unfocused, the posture of someone who has suddenly lost context, watching the future he assumed was guaranteed dissolve, not through argument or spectacle, but through Olivia's refusal to proceed. He tries to speak to recover footing, but the absence of engagement around him exposes how completely authority has shifted away from him. Patricia reacts next, stepping forward instinctively with practiced composure, offering calming gestures and low reassurances as if order might still be restored through familiarity. But her movements stall when it becomes clear that no one is looking to her for cues anymore. The image she has guarded for years, the flawless family framed by success and celebration, fractures under scrutiny, and the expressions around her change from admiration to assessment, people no longer consuming the performance but examining it. On the opposite side of the room, Stephen Grant approaches my father with deliberate restraint, his manner cordial but precise, and speaks quietly enough that their exchange feels private while being anything but. He explains that trust functions as a single system, not separate compartments, and that what has unfolded tonight raises concerns about judgment that cannot be isolated from professional relationships. There is no anger in his tone, no threat offered or negotiation suggested, just a clear statement that ongoing and future collaborations will be suspended effective immediately until reassessment can occur. Daniel listens, nodding once, understanding from the lack of drama that this is not an emotional response, but a calculated one, and that no explanation offered later will reverse what has already been seen. Around them, conversations splinter into cautious distance guests, quietly repositioning themselves, allies dissolving into acquaintances, and vendors shifting from celebration to disengagement without direction. Ryan finally steps toward Olivia again, as if proximity might still open space for dialogue, but she meets his movement with controlled distance, telling him she needs time and clarity, not solutions, her words firm without hostility. The ring remains untouched where it was placed earlier, no longer symbolic, just present, and that quiet detail carries more weight than any raised voice could have. Patricia watches this unfold with dawning comprehension, realizing that the careful narrative she constructed did not merely crack under pressure, it inverted, revealing effort and control where effortlessness and care were meant to appear. Daniel scans the thinning room, registering the whispered conversations, the subtle withdrawals, the absence of normalcy, and it finally becomes clear that this will not stay contained within a single night or a single space, that reputations do not recover when consequence is witnessed rather than rumored. There is no shouting, no dramatic exit, no spectacle that can later be dismissed as exaggerated emotion, and that restraint is precisely what seals the collapse. The music never resumes. The lights stay dimmed and the ballroom empties into quiet consensus rather than chaos. Everyone understanding that something essential has shifted and cannot be restored through silence or denial. As I stand apart from the slow disintegration, no longer the focus but no longer invisible either, it becomes clear that what is unfolding is not vengeance or punishment, but consequence, finally catching up to behavior that depended on compliance and appearance. The losses accumulating around us, social, economic, and reputational, do not arrive suddenly. They unfold with methodical inevitability. And by the time the room is half empty, the wedding is not simply over. It has been rendered impossible to pretend, leaving everyone who remains to understand that what collapsed tonight cannot be rebuilt on the same foundation that failed it. Once the room thins enough that movement no longer draws attention, Luke is already at my side, and without exchanging glances with anyone still standing near the front, we turn and leave the ballroom together, our steps even and unremarkable, not hurried and not hesitant, simply finished. There is no confrontation to close, no correction to offer, and no one interrupts us, which gives the exit a kind of finality arguments never achieve. We pass through the corridor, the doors settling shut behind us with a muted weight that sounds less like escape than conclusion. And outside, the city continues as it always does, indifferent, steady, unconcerned with what has ended inside. We don't revisit the night afterward, not to relive it or dissect it. And that restraint becomes the clearest signal that nothing remains to be negotiated. Time moves forward in the ordinary way it always does, calendars filling routines, reasserting themselves, and when contact attempts begin, they arrive without surprise. The first messages are cautious and indirect, framed as check-ins rather than acknowledgments, followed by calls that carry urgency but avoid responsibility, and then longer explanations that attempt to stretch context over consequence, where apology should be. My mother writes about family continuity. My father speaks about perspective and timing, and my brother keeps things casual, as if reducing gravity might restore access, but none of them name the action that caused this, or ask what repair would look like, and that absence clarifies more than words ever could. I respond once briefly and without emotion that I'm not open to discussing the past and that future contact won't change that decision. Then I stop responding entirely, not out of anger, but because repetition had already proven itself useless. There is no public declaration, no dramatic boundary setting, only consistency, which feels more aligned with the life I intend to keep. Months pass, and whatever conversations continue around me occur beyond my reach, attempts to reframe events and soften reputational edges, but the distance holds because it isn't fueled by outrage, it's sustained by choice. Luke checks in once, not to sway me but to confirm clarity, and I tell him plainly that this is not about punishment or bitterness, it's about refusing to participate in a system that relies on my erasure to function. The separation doesn't present as loss as much as recalibration, a structural correction after years of adjustment in the wrong direction. What surprises me most is how quickly the need to explain disappears, because explanation had never produced resolution, only deflection, and living well requires neither justification nor permission. Holidays arrive without negotiation. Conversations remain simple and unforced, and the space created by cutting contact fills not with emptiness, but with stability that doesn't ask to be defended. Days stop bracing themselves for disappointment. Relationships operate without spectators, and my life stops pausing to check whether it will be overwritten for convenience. The clarity becomes durable and quiet, not something I announce, but something I practice, choosing alignment over obligation and peace over proximity. And that is where the ending truly settles, not in the absence of family, but in the presence of authorship, understanding that blood alone does not grant the authority to edit another person's marriage, career, or existence, that shared names do not excuse control or silence, and that cutting ties without noise, without retaliation, and without return is not abandonment, but an assertion, the final acknowledgement that a life is not a draft for anyone else to revise. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.